So, hi everybody, thanks for joining. Just realized that the other one was a bit faster. So we try also not maybe then to leave you for the drinks. Yeah, welcome to the panel Increasing Viewing Time Thanks to Better Content Discovery with lovely panelists, Brigita from Estonia.
Hello.
Or Elisa. Gary from All3Media and Matthias from Google. Maybe just a few words to from your side, who you are, brief introduction, and then we can get it started. And ladies first.
Thank you. So I'm Brigita, or however someone pronounces the name, it's okay. And I will say right away that me and the handheld microphone, we're not working together. So if I forget, then Matthias was supposed to kick me, but now he's quite far. So now you have to kick me if I forget about it. But I'm the TV product owner in Elisa in Estonia. And also I'm a big fan of TV and I love TV a lot. So I'm really happy to talk about why we love TV and how to keep our customers loving TV.
Thanks.
Okay, so I'm Gary. I am the EVP of Strategic Development at All3Media International. So we're part of the All3Media group, which owns around about 50 production companies. I sit in the distribution side of that, and I am responsible for our digital distribution strategy and specifically our direct-to-consumer digital publishing.
Hi everyone, I'm Matthias. I'm in the TV platform partnerships team at Google, looking after partnerships with pay TV operators, with the wider ecosystem, building devices based on Android TV and Google TV. Specifically, I cover the Nordics, Central and Eastern Europe, and the Middle East.
Cool, great. So then let's get started. When talking about content discovery, I guess first of all we should start thinking about not the UI itself, but kind of about the device setup at home. And from our experience, this is fairly complex and there's no standard setup given out there. And we've seen the wildest things with the wildest cable and a couple of remotes lying around. And maybe just a view from your perspective from an operator perspective. So there's always a need for a TV set, and then your set-top box is coming. So how are you dealing? How do you make sure HDMI is being used and people are not just sitting on Netflix on the Samsung TV?
Well, I think that we can't expect that people only want to use the HDMI. So what we as operators, I think most of us in this room that are operators, that what we are doing is that we provide all different options. We do provide set-top boxes. Some of us provide sticks, some of us the dongles, and then also all the mobile apps, webs, smart TV apps, because you have to be ready to be anywhere. It's not for us to say that all of the users need to have the newest smart TVs or that all of the users need to have a set-top box at home. We can't expect that. We should expect that they want to use whatever device they have. And some of them have older TVs that don't have all the smart capabilities. So we are the ones to be taking it in.
And maybe Matthias, from your perspective, are there any insights on how people are using it? Is it once you get such a lovely set-top box and then you're on the set-top box and you get everything you need on the set-top box, or is it kind of, are there other user patterns that stuff is being used on smart TV, but for linear you always go on the set-top box because that's connected, or what's your perspective on that one, the position?
I think ultimately we want to empower the pay TV operator to provide everything on HDMI 1, right? I think the reality at home is that you have a smart TV, you have the pay TV set-top box, you have maybe another streaming dongle, maybe another set-top box connected. You have 3-4 UIs, 3-4 remote controls, and for the the broad masses like consuming content at home, that creates challenges, right? Like, because the different surfaces have different interfaces, different experiences, different services that you can use through these interfaces. So I think our role is trying to help the pay TV operators provide everything on one input, whether it's the live TV component, whether it's OTT services, whether it's gaming, whether it's anything that we're still kind of yet to see. and ultimately basically take that smart TV definition into the set-top box and provide everything on one remote and on one interface. So I think that is the objective from a user experience perspective. We believe that makes the most sense, and that's why we try to make or provide the technology and the access to services and apps to the pay TV operators to build the best type of experience for one input.
And maybe Gary, from a more, let's say, content and production perspective, I mean, that must be a nightmare serving all those different devices, UIs, etc. So how to cope with that from your perspective?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, what it means, as a consumer, you can plug any device into any TV and you're presented with a whole range of apps. If you use a device, a lot of Americans use a Roku device, and yet you can find our content on, probably 7, 8, 9 different apps, maybe even the same channel. But the reality is that we need to be where the eyeballs are for the business model to work. So we can't assume that everyone has a particular device. So whenever we're choosing what platforms we want to be on, our services do go predominantly OTT. It's not really a pay TV thing with Fast, but it's very much understanding that the consumer probably isn't going to change their input source to watch one particular channel. So it's important that we have distribution of our channels on as many of these devices as we possibly can.
Now, thinking about content discovery, then, I mean, there are figures out there about search time, or until you start the device, until you hit the play button, and it seems to be complicated. On the other hand, I mean, I attended focus groups, etc., where it was just natural that people were browsing through the UI and it felt okay-ish. And are there proper data, or do you aware of that this is truly an issue, that the time they search for it for the consumers, and how to measure that this is truly a problem? Because maybe it's just an industry thing. We're thinking, okay, this complexity, you could also frame it, it's a great choice consumers have in these days of opportunities, and how to track, how to measure that is really an issue for the consumers. Well, what are your thoughts on that one?
Well, I think that we can't say that any one of us in this room is doing everything perfectly right. But as a user myself, I still sometimes end up in the situation where on Saturday evening I can't find anything to watch. And I think this is the thing that shouldn't happen. We should never have this feeling inside us that we have been searching for half an hour. So it's totally fine to search around it if you don't get this feeling. The frustration of I can't find anything to watch, my 3 hours of free time is soon to be up, and I still didn't watch anything. But I do agree that also what we have heard from others today is that measuring the time, how long does it take for you to find content to watch, is a good measurement, because then you don't get this bad feeling that the user shouldn't have. That's my thought.
But and you mentioned something that you can't find something, but whose fault is that? Is that then the fault of the consumer, or are you bad in kind of the way what you're presenting, and how to improve it actually?
It's not the consumer's fault. It never can be, because then we have to do something better. It's our responsibility in the end to have the happy eyeballs in front of the TV and not the ones feeling the frustration. I think sometimes it might be the recommendations that we get, so that the recommendations in the end are not what we have been looking for as the users, whatever apps we are talking about, whatever services, but it's also about how to present it. So I think it's the whole package in the end.
So maybe Matthias, what makes user click at the very end? Because that's the ultimate goal, right? So whenever they open up or start the set-top box, so the target is to press play. So you could also argue then this doesn't happen with linear because there's immediately playing. This is not happening for fast. So back in the days when you started the set-top box, life was per default a video signal was running, right? Is that the option for the future, and we should go away from this overwhelming start screens with plenty of options? So what makes a consumer click?
tough question. I think, I think every consumer is different to an extent, and the usage scenarios are different. You know, Saturday evening, you might be in the mood for a specific type of title, and then you're in the position to find it on the various services that you subscribe to. So that is, you know, a challenge that, you know, can be solved. If it's about, you know, being personal and relevant at the very moment, it's about, you know, as a platform provider, figuring out that you know, what type of content could fit that, right? So if you think about relevance or personalization, you know, if we think of the live TV aspect of it, if there's different types of shows or events on TV, whether it's, you know, the Oscars or a Champions League game, understanding that this particular user might be more interested in one or the other, and then presenting that content in an easy to find way on the home screen, that is one thing. But also, you know, contextually in a given genre, you know, staying with the Oscars example, if you know, you curate content around a certain event that is maybe top of mind for, you know, many people at the very moment, and you show the titles that are nominated, right? And you have the deep links to the actual services that provide that content. I think it's a very kind of broad question. Certainly not a single answer to it. But ultimately, I think there's an abundance of content, and choice is great, but choice creates the challenge, right? To find something that is worth my time at that very moment. So I think, first off, like from our perspective, making that content available or helping our partners to provide that content to users, but then also, you know, putting them in a position to understand what's happening on the device, and then presenting the content in a way that then makes them click, essentially.
And maybe, Gary, you mentioned already kind of the fast term, which is kind of full circle coming back to kind of the old days. Is from your perspective, is that a mean to overcome this like paradox of choice? So many options, just to take away this burden from the consumer to make a choice out of 50 different titles, and just to get it started, and then it's easier to choose.
Yeah, I mean, I always trace this back to, you know, what I call the home of fast, the United States, and the world of cord cutting. And so you suddenly got to this world where, you know, everyone thought cord cutting was this fantastic idea. They cut the cord, they keep their internet connection, and then they would self-select from, you know, 3, 4, 5 SVODs. And then very quickly you realize that your content diet isn't met by 3, 4, 5 SVODs. So then you get to the world of AVOD. But the thing that's been lost in all of this is the casual viewing. That point where you get home on a rainy Tuesday night and you put the TV on and you just want to watch something. And if every time you turn your TV set on, it's asking you, what do you want to watch? Then that's a problem, and that's where we've got it wrong. That's where fast really started to come in, was you had this sort of rump of cord cutters that no longer had access to those linear feeds on cable, and they just wanted something to be on. And that's fast to me as a casual view. So really, it's sort of, as this sort of goes around the world, it's sort of figuring out what is the entrance to that journey. And yeah, from there, mentally you can hone what you want to watch, and the interface absolutely makes a difference. But you've got to start that journey somewhere.
And so it's not only fast typically, I guess this is also, and also when talking about linear is that, clearly it's in decline, but there it's at least what we're seeing, it's not either or. So it's always kind of a different options, different sources of content. And this is kind of talking about aggregation, right? So it's the question how to build a layer on top of the various sources that are in place to make it easier for consumers. So Brigita, from your perspective as an aggregator, basically, and it used to be an aggregator back in the day, so we were just bundling linear channels, so that's getting a little bit broader. Seems like technology-wise, this is getting easier. It's not anymore porting apps and on a Linux set-top box and developing it. So that seems to be solved. So what's from your perspective now to challenge taking this aggregator role, building this layer across the various sources?
Well, I think in the morning, in the first panel already, it was a topic of content and content discovery and all that. And already there, from Malente and Michael also mentioned that it's not so easy. Making the deals is not easy, but also from technology point of view is that now you have all the platforms. It's not just one setup box that it used to be, but now it's everything. It's the whole shebang. And if we think back to how it used to be with the photo cameras, so you used to have, when you go to travel, you had the big, massive, super expensive camera. Now you're just taking the picture with an iPhone. But to get to that point, or not maybe an iPhone, maybe also an Android phone, or Google Pixel.
You needed to say that?
Yes, yes. But it's a transition, and now to transition from being a super aggregator on set-top box, now we are being aggregators and super aggregators on all platforms. It's not just one platform anymore, and it's not so simple anymore, because it's used to be just apps on your set-top box. But now you have to think how to do it on phones and to cover everything everywhere. So it's chill. It's a struggle, I think, for all.
And so Matthias, from your point of view, you're providing kind of the foundation actually to enable operators. So which are the components which you see are the most tricky ones to get along? Because I mean, the App Store itself, that can't be an issue anymore because it's there. So you can download whatever, a BBC iPlayer app or Netflix, etc. So where are the pitfalls when being an operator and integrating?
The pitfalls or the challenges?
Both.
Both. So
talk about the challenges first.
The challenges. I think when we talk about content discovery, then I think we do a lot of work to get all the relevant apps into the store to enable the pay TV operator to do the commercial agreements, to do the preloads, to do the subscription bundles, you know, all the commercial side of it. At the same time, we work a lot on ingesting their content or integrating their feeds with the knowledge graph, the Google knowledge graph. At the same time, you have Google Assistant on an Android TV device that taps into that, right? That can search all these third-party apps. And I think on an operator device...
Maybe to jump in on that one, that seems fairly easy, but is it truly like that? So who needs to work on that one to enable that from an operator perspective, but also from a apps perspective? Is that given, or do you need to do something just taking local, because Netflix, YouTube, Disney tick, because that's going to happen on a global level. But we heard earlier about TV3 or Go3, so the local stuff. And I guess this is kind of also what might differentiate then the local operators against an Apple TV, against a Google TV, a Fire TV, to have those local players integrated. So how to get there?
So I was actually trying to get to that. Like, ultimately, I think for the app developers, the global players first, the regional ones. You know, we have a large team on the Play side that works with the relevant content providers, right, to get their content searchable and accessible. Now that currently happens through the Google Assistant, right, that is able to query the content. So what does this mean from an operator perspective on an operator device? You have voice search on the remote that queries all the installed applications, right? At the same time, operator content is prioritized, and the operator controls what search results are shown. They own the 3 watch actions, the only visible watch actions, right? So they are empowered to basically guide the user towards their content first. At the same time, you make the content from other sources available through, let's say, the integration work that we do. Now, getting the own content integrated, that is definitely something that is not kind of turnkey off the shelf, right? That requires some heavy lifting or some work, right? So if you ask about challenges, then yes, there's a lot of opportunities to get the device really to that level where it's completely operator branded and controlled, but still there's some work that needs to be done based on the local content that a given operator has in the given market that may or may not have been ingested to the knowledge graph just yet, right? If it's global titles, Google will understand that it's a media item. If it's an Estonian production company that has exclusive content licensed to you, that content may or may not be available just yet, right? So I think in that process of building Android TV devices or Android TV operator tier devices, it's about that effort that the operator also undertakes to make that device really kind of their own experience, right? And then they can leverage the technologies that we provide at full extent, basically.
Maybe Gary can comment on that one, because at least from our work, this is always then this nitty-gritty challenge to make to get to this level, because otherwise, like on this global level, tick, and then I mean, you can basically exchange then Google, Apple, Fire TV, so they are, I'd say, on par. But those local content, I guess, is clearly a differentiating factor. And maybe Gary can comment on that also from an operational perspective, what it means to get this up and running and maintaining it on a continuous basis.
Absolutely. So if we take this right the way up the stream to us delivering the content to the partner, to the app, there's a whole level of work that has to happen with metadata. And so there's a number of issues with metadata. One is that there's not one single system that everyone uses. Two is that some of the single systems that do exist are effectively pulling information off the internet that may or may not be correct, or not necessarily using the correct images that we want used. So we're having to go back to those suppliers and correct that. So the bigger problem, I guess, is that as an industry, we have a bit of a legacy issue here. So AVOD and FAST at the moment, sure there are, you see some co-productions, you see some originals, but predominantly it's a library business. And the reality is that when a lot of the TV shows that appear on these services were created, there was not the need for this metadata. There was not the need for there to be 3 or 4 key images per episode. So I mean, a great example from all three is that we've just been working here in the UK with an app called STV Player, where we have brought back a 40-year-old soap opera called Brookside. Now, you can imagine, apart from the sort of issue of cleaning up those tapes and getting them digitized, the level of metadata that was recorded 40 years ago is nowhere near what's required now. So you immediately need an army of people to actually sort that out. So you've got to clean up the metadata, you've got to get the metadata into the right format for the right platform, and then you have various aggregators that are working between the platforms and the suppliers that aren't necessarily supplying the correct data and aren't necessarily making it easy enough for you to correct that data.
And I will add before you end is that we also have the issue of language, because having the smaller languages and the metadata then, I think it's a challenge for a lot of people in the room, and definitely it's an issue. And we don't have an easy solution for that, because Estonian language is super small, but there are so many other that are bigger languages, and they face the same issue. To get the metadata in your language and region is another.
I think the other thing, I feel your pain, because just as you have that problem with local production, what we're trying to do in FAST is evolve that space. So we are starting to do some low-level original production in that space. So we're working with talent to create compilations around their libraries. And we can do that all day long. It's not a difficult job to do. The difficult part beyond the editing of that is actually getting the various search tools to recognize a new title that hasn't been on TV before anywhere, that hasn't had a big global premiere, but still requires a space on the EPG and still requires a description that only we can supply.
I mean, we might come back to this metadata question when, but I just wanted to talk a little bit again about this aggregator role, particularly from a commercial perspective, because what you're doing, could also summarize it, you're basically unifying business models in a UI in a way, because you have kind of your own subscription where you bring kind of linear channels, then you eventually get AVOD service, rev share models. You have SWOT stuff that is integrated where you're using payments or it's on your operator bill. So first of all, what's your perception on that role, and what are your challenges? And the third one, just to wrap up, from a UI perspective, are there any prioritization driven by the business models given from the source of the content?
I can start, I think. I think what's our role is that we are the role of providers, because in the end what matters is that the customer finds the content. So it needs to be a win-win situation for all of us. So the operator, we need to be the winners. The S-Vote service or the big guys that we are having some kind of business model with, they need to be the winners. And then in the end, the bigger winner is the customer who gets the content that they are actually looking for. And if we look at it only as like a situation of enemies or situation of fighting, we get nowhere. Because in the end, the customer is this one who is losing, and he is the one who shouldn't lose, or he or she. So at that point, I think that we are the providers. What's the challenge in doing the business deals? I think what has also come out today in several discussions is getting to the right door, so that you would have the possibility to get on board all the different providers you would like to have. And then the business models can be different in that regards. Depends on the contracts. Also, this is not so highly my topic. But what I wanted to add was that also when talking about content discovery in the end and who is prioritized, it should be the content that the customer wants to watch. So it's, I think, the egos game that sometimes we have to put our egos aside a little.
I agree, and it's an ego game, but it's also sometimes a technology game in terms of integration, right?
Definitely.
And maybe Matthias, I guess you're trying to facilitate and to a certain extent also standardize, because if let's say don't talk about Netflix all the time. Let's take someone else, Paramount or Discovery. So they do an integration, billing integrations, etc. It seems like this is also heavy lifting in order to get that going. On the other hand, this could be an opportunity actually for an operator to integrate them also beyond having it on the bill, offering kind of a discount then to the consumer. So what's your offering actually to facilitate and make that type of integration easier?
Good question. I mean, I think the vast majority of our partners, they do the operator integrations, the subscription billing integrations. So there is processes in place with the large app developers that do want to do these types of integrations. We're the enabler or the facilitator from a availability perspective, that the apps are there, that they're neatly and tightly integrated with our APIs, to be searchable, these types of things that I just mentioned a few minutes ago. But ultimately, I think the business side of things is core to the pay TV operator business on their device, right? So having all the flexibility that they want, on their own device to strike these types of deals is crucial, right? Obviously, the Play Store is available on the devices. It's up to the app developer then, to provide or to facilitate the subscription directly with the operator within the operator launcher, or whether they're just available as an app in the Play Store. And then there's, of course, frictionless subscriptions with Play Billing, right? There's rev share models with operators. So I think there's like two paths to that, but ultimately our role is really the enabler, right?
Also, before we move forward, what I remembered was that with the deals, what is interesting from the operator's point of view, I think, is that everyone wants to have the button on the remote. And in the end, we run out of the buttons.
15 buttons. Just thinking about why we looked when Paramount launched in Germany in December. So what we did, we went through all the different means where you could subscribe to, and no offense against Sky, but it was like a voucher solution where you needed to log in, then you got a voucher, and then you were logging into Paramount. We did it as well on Apple. We did it on the Fire TV stick. It was basically one click. So users are then, they know it, actually they're trained to it, they know it from their smartphones, etc. So how to overcome that? Or are the users, if for whatever reason the discount is high enough, they're just taking the pain? Or are they then at a certain point of time then taking other means because it's just too complicated and they don't get it done?
I think the service shouldn't be so complicated that someone needs to leave because of that reason, but I do agree that being a user myself, if it gets too hard, we all get annoyed. It depends a lot on what the consumer is used to, what they have had before, what are they used to having. Might also be a bit dependent on the age group, the demographics, all that, but it should be as easy as possible. It shouldn't be something that you have to think about as a user. But definitely it's not easy from our point of view.
And that's, I guess this is one of the challenges. Now coming once again to kind of, because talking about content discovery and the ultimate goal is hitting the play button, right? And there are a lot of myth around, okay, what's recommendation engine here, word of mouth, recommendation from a friend, maybe it's as simple as that, and there's put a lot of effort into that one. So maybe starting with from the content perspective. So what's your perspective? What works? What type of experience do you have? What works in terms of recommendation?
Yeah, I mean, we try and work with all of our platform partners to understand what's on their marketing calendar so that we're making our offering as relevant as we can. But it also means that we can go back and make tweaks to the metadata, because there's things that will come up in a marketing calendar that you may well not have thought of when you're sort of trying to come up with 10 key terms to describe a show. And you can go back and change that. What we're also doing in the fast space is we're doing a lot of work with the bumpers around our content. So if I take a brand like Midsummer Murders, which does tens of thousands of minutes streamed across North America each week, we're not just stacking those episodes, because that's quite a, it's a simple solution, but it doesn't give a compelling reason to come to this fast channel to watch it. So because we work closely with the production company on that show, we are working with them to see what additional content we could bring to it. It's almost going full circle back to DVD extras. So, earlier this year we curated John Nettles, who was the first lead detective on Midsummer Murders, his top 10 episodes. He recorded stuff with us that was exclusive to the channel. And that then gave the platforms something to talk about. We recognize that when we work with the platforms, we need to give them a reason, beyond metadata, but a reason in the advertising spaces that they control to be talking about what we're doing. So just playing out episodes and hoping isn't the answer. So we are trying to create special scheduled moments that are unique to our channels.
And now taking Netflix as an example, two things. They first of all, they introduced top 10, which seems a bit odd, having this great recommendation engine, and now going back to kind of a top 10 model and taking away kind of the surprise model as well. So it seems like, okay, that maybe not has worked so good. So from your perspective, from your experience with your customer, what works as a recommendation? Does it need to be a reco engine? Does it need to be personalized, or is kind of this well-educated database top 10 model good enough in order to maybe this is even reducing complexity, and then you have 10 things to choose from and not 50, and this is already making it easier for the consumers?
With everything around content discovery and recommendations, but it's important, I think, in the end, is that you have to keep on trying. You have to be bold enough to try new things all the time, because the things that we are telling today, or all the other panels telling today, it's not a secret sauce, and it's not like a 10-step solution how to have it, how to make it work perfectly. In the end, it's different for all of us. Some of us are doing the original content, which is definitely something that differentiates us, and we are also doing our original content, which is really good. And I was super surprised that Estonians can have so good humor. They're super funny and really good quality, and I'm super proud for what we have done. From recommendation side, we definitely have room for improvement. All the curated recommendations are still relevant for all of us as users. And having recommendations, I think something that is scary about it is that if you go wrong one time, you lose the trust. Because when you watched Netflix and you watched one documentary, nothing, no bad feelings about Netflix because I do watch a lot of Netflix, is that I watched one documentary, then I had 3 stripes of documentaries. I don't watch so many documentaries. I do watch a lot of reality TV, but then I had loads of these. But the word of mouth recommendations, they will always be working, and they will always be working really well, because my pregnant friend asked me, can you please recommend me 10 series to watch because I'm so bored. So sometimes I think the word of mouth might work better. And also yesterday at the event, we were discussing about TV as usual. So also there, the new series in Apple TV, sorry again, came as a talking point. It's a series called Shrinking. It's really good, go watch it. So it works, it still works, this topic. Yeah.
You want to comment or?
Happy to. First off, Apple TV Plus is available as an app on Android TV, so.
And works well.
No, I was just going to allude to the part about the relevance at the time, right, or word of mouth. One of the feature I use quite a lot is the watch list feature, right? When you search for a title or a show, you're able to put that title on a watch list. It's tied to the Google account, but ultimately what that enables is then to show when that title becomes available on the various sources. You have a list, right, of titles that you've talked to with friends at a given time, and if you then have time, are in the mood to watch one of these titles, you see it, okay, it's part of my Netflix subscription, it's available as a TVOD here, it's there, right? So it fosters that type of discovery across the different platforms with a very simple type of feature, right? But that it requires that ingest of the metadata, and that I think is the biggest challenge to crack, right? Like how to ingest that content from as many partners as possible, from a pay TV operator perspective, but from a platform provider perspective to then provide that layer, right?
That's just what I wanted to say, because thinking about the recommendation is typically happening then within the SWOT service, and they have full control because they know what they recommend, what the user is playing back, if they stop after 10 minutes, if they stop after 15 minutes. When thinking about now about the aggregator and taking this recommendation role, so you're missing those type of data because you're handing over someone into an app, then the user is there for 15 minutes, you don't know if really consuming it or not, or what's going to happen there. So this feedback loop is missing. Also kind of talking about this watch list, continue watching on this aggregator level. So will that be solved, or will the streamers be reluctant in order to open up their APIs, sending this information onto the platform level? Who want to comment?
We have Netflix in the room.
Also, I mean, taking Netflix apart, because they, Lisa, this, I think this, they're a different animal. Just think about all those local, the PSBs. I mean, that's lovely that we have this type of content, this broadcast, this variety in Europe, and in order to enable it. And sometimes the question if it's a technical issue, or is it a commercial topic? I think mostly it's mixed, but the easier it gets from a technical perspective, then those things get solved. So what's your, is it easy to do that, to run this kind of unified, continue watching? Are you, is that something becoming like a standard?
I think we can say that if we talk only about Google TV and Google devices, then of course Watch Next is something that is quite simple because it's all over the apps and everyone can add their content there. But unifying anything all over the apps is difficult. It's super difficult. It's one part is difficult from the commercial side, but also from technical side. It would be nice if someone in the room would solve the problem for all of us to have unified everything. It would be nice. So
I mean, we're agnostic on this, obviously, for our sales team license content to all the SVOD players. But from a personal point of view, you know, in my house, I've probably, in different rooms, you know, whether it's my kids or whether it's me, we probably have 3 or 4 different devices. And that's the point, is that if you're in one ecosystem, maybe that's possible. But is that actually possible if my son's got a Fire TV stick, I've got an Apple TV box, we've got, you know, Android TV elsewhere? How does that work?
Maybe that's not an ambition level, and it's okay that the like also the part of the discovery are happening within apps, right? So if you get the right entry point and the right inspiration on this aggregation layer with the right branding, so people and users get into the apps, then it's should be okay. Just as a wrap up, since it's from a going forward perspective, I mean, obviously you're arguing that that a set-top box is an important thing, but how to cope then ultimately with kind of the Apple TVs, etc., and that the user is not. So what's your value add compared to just an Apple TV or on Samsung? They're going into with exclusive content now, etc., to remain relevant in the future.
Well, I think to begin with is that we have the local, what the big guys and big apps, they don't have. They don't have the local, so we are winning in that game. Then how to stay relevant with the set-top boxes and devices and so on, and how to provide all the different devices and all the different apps and everything, is that we have to find ways to be able to do that. I think this is the most honest way, is to say that in the end, when I go home from work, it's important that whatever I did that day will make the customers happy. And if we all deal with it that way, knowing that the customer at home is actually happy, then we are doing a good job, I think. And then we will stay relevant as a set-top box or as an app.
I think that are perfect closing remarks, keeping the customer happy, whatever it needs to do that. And I think the conclusion is it's super different per territory, per user group, etc. But that's the ultimate goal, to do that, and try every day very hard to do that. So thanks a lot for the panel. It was great speaking and talking about the topic. Thanks for the audience. If fine, I would skip the Q&A, go straight to the drinks, and we're around, and let's do the Q&A session then over at the drinks. Thanks a lot for listening.